You made a case that Neanderthals and humans interbred. Is there any evidence for or against a 50-50 contribution from both sexes?
Yes, yes, yes. It's a difficult thing to nail down. The kinds of analyses that one would do are looking at the sex-linked loci. So X chromosomes are present in 2 copies in females and 1 copy in males. So if one had an extreme scenario where you have all Neanderthal males and all human females, for example, then the Neanderthal males are introducing only 1/2 the number of X chromosomes as the females are that are contributing 2 copies of this. So you might expect to see a difference in the amount of Neanderthal ancestry on the X chromosomes versus the autosomes. There's a faint hint of a signal like that, but nothing that I would say with any assurance right now. Yeah, but it's an interesting question that hopefully the data will give us a clear answer to at some point, but not so yet. Yes?
I read recently that it is known that the humans back then had cerebellum and the Neanderthals didn't, and that this cerebellum was some extra RAM that was useful for modern human kinds of functions. Is that something you can see in genetic
no, I'm not
evidence?
familiar with that work. Is that looking at cranial morphology and some bump in the...
It was just stated in a book that I'm reading, and I have no basis other than that. It seemed to be authoritative.
It's not something that I have heard, but I'm not a physical anthropologist. It very well may be true. Looking at genetics to understand neuroanatomy is a science in its infancy, for sure. There are many, many thousands of genes that are expressed in different times and places in the developing brain, and what governs the regulation of those genes is something that is not well understood at all. Hopefully one day that will be better understood. The president, that he's made this a priority, that we want to understand brain function and neuroanatomy and neural development, and I think that's a wise thing for sure. It's one of these things that's kind of rare in science where we all are asked to focus on something and come together for this common goal, like the moonshot or whatever, and people like that. People get excited about it, and it's a good goal. We would love to know exactly how the brain develops in exquisite detail. It would be a useful thing for answering that question, for example. If we knew exactly the gene expression program and what genes are expressed when and how they affect brain development, then we could look at the Neanderthal, we have their genomes now, and make some guess as to how their brains would have developed. But it's an ambitious, big goal because it's hard and it's not done. And so we can't say so much about, from the genome, what the Neanderthal brain looked like.
Thank you.
Sorry, in the interest of time, we'll just have the remaining folks in line ask questions, and then we'll have to wrap it up. Thanks.
Based on your range data, it looks like Neanderthals actually probably originated geographically in the Middle East. Is that correct, or I don't know where the oldest Neanderthal fossil was found, and do we know very much about the immediate ancestors of Neanderthals and what their history is, and any attempt at doing DNA analysis on them?
All good questions. The common ancestor of Neanderthals and humans, or what is ancestral to Neanderthals, this question is sometimes called the muddle in the middle, because there are a lot of fossil specimens from that time, 500,000 years or so ago, all over the world. And how these relate to one another, there are lumpers and there are splitters. There are a lot of people who say they're all Homo erectus, and a lot of people say no, everyone is a different species of things. And which one of them gave rise to Neanderthals? People argue about that. There are hominin in individuals that are on this line that has humans on it, since our common ancestor with chimps. These are hominins. There are hominin fossils that are found in Europe and in the Middle East and in Asia that are older than the common ancestor population of humans and Neanderthals. So this, it's becoming clear, I think, that the idea that we have of episodes of migration out of Africa, where all hominins originated, if you just go back far enough, we all come from Africa. Neanderthals, Homo erectus, everything comes from Africa at some point in the past. This episode of migration to become Homo erectus in Europe, or to become Neanderthals or whatever, it probably wasn't as clean as that. There probably was some level of migration through the years. So it is a hard thing and a very contentious thing to say who were the direct ancestors of Neanderthals. Were they the hominin forms like the Dmanisi fossil or the Simo de los Huesos fossils that you find in Europe that are 400,000 years old? Or were the ancestors of Neanderthals still in Africa at that time? People fight like crazy about that, and there's not a clear, agreed upon answer in the field. So where Neanderthals came from, it's a hard thing to say, but if you go back far enough, they came from Africa. All hominins come from Africa. The oldest hominins, the Australopithecines of 3, 4, 5 million years ago, throughout that range, they're all in East Africa in this Rift Valley. That's kind of where we were at the time. And then we spread through Africa at different periods, and you find things in South Africa, and occasionally you find things outside of Africa, sometimes very far away. 1.5 or so million years ago, you find Homo erectus in Indonesia and in mainland China. So we know that there must have been a very, very early migration out of Africa that eventually led to those guys who went extinct. That was separate from the migration that led to Neanderthals. That was also separate from the migration that led to humans. That was not at all a clear answer, but I think it is somehow accurate portrayal of the.
But there are no obviously Neanderthal fossils from Africa.
No.
That we know of.
That form evolved outside of Africa.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. But their ancestors live within Africa.
Right. But what about attempts at DNA analysis on?
Yeah, so there's a time horizon of about 100,000 years that it's hard for DNA to preserve.
Last that long, right.
Yeah, and over about 100,000 years, even in very special conditions, you rarely see it. Although there is now a horse that is 700,000 years old that DNA has been recovered from.
Wow.
But this is a very special thing, a Pleistocene horse that lived in the far north and died on frozen ground, permafrost ground, and has been frozen since it died. If we found a Neanderthal that was like that, or anything that was like that, then maybe we could hope to recover DNA. But sadly, since the Holocene started, most of Neanderthal range has thawed, and their bones have been hot, and it's no good. And some of the most interesting places in East Asia and Indonesia, you just don't get any DNA from 100 years ago. It's gone.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm thinking of the differences between a golden retriever and a timber wolf, and it brings to mind a question: is there any indication that personality traits are genetically connected?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not really my field. There probably, I've heard that there are some genetic associations with risk-taking behavior and all kinds of other things. More generally, there is this theory that's out there about human evolution that we are like the domestic dogs, a domesticated species, but we just happen to be self-domesticated. Yeah, and it's an interesting idea. We make these comparisons between humans and other great apes. There are things that we do that aren't that amazing until you start looking at other animals and see that it never happens. For example, we communicate an enormous amount of information when we look at one another. And we do that. We look at one another in the eye. We have these large exposed sclera on either side of our eyeball. So we know when someone's looking at us, when they're not looking at us. Chimpanzees don't have that. They don't seem to be able to know as accurately as we do when someone's looking directly at them. And if they do stare at one another for any length of time, it's a sign of aggression, and they're going to fight. We don't do that. We gaze follow. We're very, very attuned, not only with what we're thinking, but with what everyone else is thinking. And this thing is called theory of mind, that we're special because not only can we know what we're thinking, but we can know what other people are thinking, and we can deceive them. And this is one of the magical things about the human brain, that we need to be able to do that to operate in the societies that we have. And chimpanzees don't do anything like that. They're very social species, and they have a hierarchy rank, and they live in groups and require that, but nothing at all to the level that we do. And one theory behind this is that we domesticated ourselves. All of the things that we did to dogs, we first did to ourselves so that we can learn from one another and benefit from one another. There are parallel experiments in dogs where they look to see, can the dog tell where I'm looking, and will he use that as a cue? These experiments are awesome. Like, even puppies that have never been trained to do it, you can put food underneath different bowls and look at the one that's got the food in it, and they'll go to the one that you're looking at because they know instinctively to follow what you're doing. Wolves, they won't do this. Even other primates won't do this. They can be trained to do it, but they won't do it instinctively. And these ideas that we are following one another, and we're constantly communicating and updating our mind, not only with what we think, but our perception of what everybody else is thinking, that very well may be a sign of self-domestication and a very uniquely human thing like dogs. But the genes behind it, that's probably other people know more about that than I do. Yeah.
So my question relates to the Great Leap Forward that you mentioned, trying to figure out what 2 or 3 things we know about it. It sounds like we don't know much about it. It sounds like I thought it was 10 to 40,000 years ago, maybe it's 100,000. Maybe one reason that it happened has to do with speech, or are there other reasons, other models, just kind of what happened? Maybe we don't know. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Richard Klein makes a very convincing argument just based on the archaeological record that for hundreds of thousands of years we make these tools that basically look the same. It's the same technology forever. And then all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, we start making symbolic art, carving these little figurines and making things out of bones, which we seem to have never had the idea to do before. Making needles, having shells as symbolic art, drawing things on the walls of caves that are, maybe 30,000 years old, but you can look at today with your brain and you instantly recognize that's art. I know what that person was doing and I know why they were doing it. But we never did that for a long, long time. And then all of a sudden we started doing it everywhere. That's the idea. And I think there is something to that. But what biological differences are behind it, we hope to find them by comparing us to Neanderthal.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Wow, good to be last. You sort of alluded to this a little earlier, and toward the end of your talk, you did say back migration. But how do anthropologists justify wave after wave of migration that seems to be going on a one-way road, when I would think on any given year somebody decides, I'll go east or I'll go west? Why isn't there a complete 100% backward migration?
Yeah, it's a good question. Kind of a first principles argument could be that if there is a region that is uninhabited or sparsely inhabited and a region that is inhabited, you go into the region that is uninhabited, and when you need more resources or more land, you continue to go into the uninhabited region rather than going back to the region that's already occupied. Kind of like the east to west story of the colonization post-Columbian of this continent.
Yeah,
But there are people who go back.
We
And
had those previous waves that went out hundreds of thousands of years before. So nobody toward the end was moving into a vacuum.
yeah, I think there very well could be a place for more back migration, but we're never surprised when we see hominins in Africa. There is a long, continuous, roughly fossil record in Africa. There is a more spotty, an episodic fossil record outside of Africa, and the most parsimonious explanation for that is occasional waves of migration out of Africa and continuous habitation of Africa.
Yeah.
But embedded within that could be back migration into Africa. And we do see genetic evidence of that now from the most recent dispersal. I shouldn't say migration. My partner always gets on to me about this. Migrating implies that you're going back, which is actually what you're talking about here, but it's dispersal. Humans, migration is what a bird does. It goes and comes back and goes and comes back. We dispersed out of Africa. Our population dispersed out of Africa. We see evidence of reverse dispersal back into Africa in some regions of Africa, especially northeast Africa, around the Horn of Africa. There's a very strong signal of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Dr. Green, for a great event. Everybody have a great night.